Liftoff.
Brilliant.
We'll turn this on too, just to be different. Cool. Welcome to Business Leaders Podcast. We're here today with Matthew Barnes. He's the owner of Momenta Media and partner and chief solutions officer and virtual reality lead at SeeSaw Labs. I'm your host, Bob Rourke, and today on Business Leaders Podcast, where we interview some of the best and brightest business owners and entrepreneurs in and around the state of Colorado. We talk about the ins and outs of running a business and being an entrepreneur. Insights shared by the top business leaders and entrepreneurs in the state of Colorado. We talk about what to do, and as importantly, what not to do about growing, running, or starting a business. And on the show today, we're incredibly fortunate to have Matthew Barnes. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you.
Matthew, tell us a little bit about how you got started and your business a little bit.
So going way back, my background is actually in engineering, formerly educated as a civil engineer. Partway through that, realized that what I really love was problem solving, not necessarily civil engineering. So I got started in the startup entrepreneurship kind of world pretty early on in college, realizing that was going to be my out, right? I really liked diving into things that were complicated, that maybe I didn't know a lot about, and just getting up to speed and trying to work in that kind of realm. And technology is very attractive because the barrier to entry is so low, right? So you need a computer and the internet basically to start getting your hands dirty. And so while I was at university, I actually was doing seismic design, so earthquake engineering, while moonlighting, running an apparel company.
Well, those are just the same.
Exactly the same. Exactly. Yeah. So getting my feet wet in e-commerce, and eventually went on to then drop out of grad school to run that e-commerce company for that startup, and kind of built from the ground up their whole platform as far as marketing and advertising and the e-commerce website, the whole nine yards. Also did apparel design, and did that for about 3.5 years, and then went on to a company called Moose Jaw Mountaineering. Which, if you're in the outdoor space, you may know. It's a little bit like REI. I did all the analytics and split testing there. So really diving into that kind of marketing aspect and understanding how users interact and behave with a piece of technology. I find that that sort of thing is one of the most interesting problems for me, because it kind of goes beyond just the basic kind of problem solving. Now you're getting someone to do something that you anticipate you want them to do, right? And so kind of closing the feedback loop on that and testing hypothesis, very exciting thing. And all the while, so Momenta Media, which you mentioned, is kind of the side hustle thing along the way, where I couldn't get enough of just the one thing I was doing, right? I wanted to also find other people who were having problems and say, I can help you too. And a lot of times that started with just personal connections, and then moved on to getting connected with other people that had e-commerce businesses, where I thought I could lend a hand and reshape things, building websites, just kind of teaching myself all of that. And then now SeeSaw Labs, which you mentioned. So SeeSaw Labs is like a digital production agency, which is just a vague enough term that it can encompass almost anything, but just specific enough that you kind of get a little idea. Basically, the short version is, if it's on a screen, we probably create it. And so if you can imagine, like what I try not to say is we don't build apps, we don't build websites. That's this kind of like really discrete way of looking about technology. And quite frankly, you can get just about anybody to build something like that, right? People do it all the time. Ship a website up to India or whatever, get something built. And anybody who's done that probably knows that's not always the most effective way to get the job done. So where we kind of focus is, we really focus on, we're not looking for projects, we're looking for partners. And so the reason I say it that way is that we've kind of developed our process into these phases that come alongside a business and find out what's your pain point. Like, why do you think that you want to build this thing? Or maybe you don't know what you want to build, right? You just have a problem, and you know that technology is probably going to be the realm in which you have that solution, whether it's getting customers in the door, which is the way that everybody makes money, or communicating your idea, or even making your business run more effectively, right? So a lot of things, even a quick example, we partner with a company who does textile recycling. Okay, so you wouldn't think, like, how the heck is textile recycling fit technology? Well, there's a fleet of drivers out there that need to go collect from these bins, and that's not a simple task when these bins sometimes might be blocked or damaged or whatever, and you also need to do estimating for what types of things you're picking up. So there's this whole kind of like complicated problem, and so we've developed a solution that just works on an iPad that they take around with them, and it simplifies dramatically all of the number crunching and accounting sort of things for a business like that. So our big thing is really partnering. So figuring out what that solution is. Yes, we then do the execution phase, that build phase, but then it goes beyond that, right? Because great, I built you a thing. How do you know that it works? We're really interested in that problem. That's a scary problem. I think that it is easy for people who are maybe not as confident or talented, right, to build you a thing and then hand it to you and then just walk away. But our thing is really that we want to help make sure we solve the problem, or maybe the problem changes.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned that on a prototypical client, when they come through the door, there's a discrete process that you go through with them.
Yes.
Because I could come and say, I want a website.
Yeah.
And what I really mean is, I want a customer. So let's dig into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I often try to avoid specifically saying the word website. What you need is a marketing site, right? That's usually what it means, and so that sort of captures this thing of, I need a customer. I need somebody to do something, right? My pain point is I want somebody to engage with me, and so we'll come alongside and find out, how do people find out who you are? What does a typical customer look like? What are they looking for? And so there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. So this initial prototype phase, so building something can be really daunting, right? Especially if the project is quite large. And so we come up with this kind of initial phase, which is an engagement that's much smaller. We dive into analytics. Most people don't even have analytics, right? So if you say you want a new website, I'm going to wire up your old website and find out, how are people using it. So an example that comes to mind is we just recently partnered with a company in Oklahoma, and they had a website, and they technically had Google Analytics on it. It wasn't very granular. We spent an initial month with them analyzing the data coming out of that to find out, like, what are people looking for when they come here? How do they interact? And we found some really interesting stuff. We found a lot of people were coming to the website because they wanted a job. Because this was a company that was one of the best places to work in Oklahoma. It was, and they were getting a lot of traffic from some sites that were mentioning them in news articles. And so we talked through, is that something that's important to you? Do you really want? Your business is expanding. You want to capture those people, and it's something that then we could emphasize, like, in the next phase. And a lot of times you'll have where people, they think they want one thing, but their problem actually means that they need something else. So there's another one, restore cryotherapy. So cryotherapy, if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, for the guy.
That's right.
It was called, what was it called again?
Cryotherapy. Restore Cryotherapy is the company.
Restore Cryotherapy.
Cryotherapy is the service.
I've seen that. It looks, you see people, they stand in the box and they get frozen. They don't stay there very long.
That's right.
They stay there for a period of time.
It's not quite like coming out like Dr. Evil, like in Austin Powers, but that's right. But yeah, you get very cold for a short period of time, and this is very huge, kind of in the CrossFit kind of community, student athletes, anyone that's looking for these recovery kind of aspects, and as probably many of the people listening know very well, is as your business is growing, you're not always doing things the most optimal way. You're just kind of adding something on to help get you through the next day, week, hour, whatever it is. And they had sort of built up this website that so it became a franchise. And so for all their locations, there was just like one more thing tacked on, and they were really outgrowing it. And so we came alongside them and realized that what is the purpose of the site? And a lot of it was they needed to get people in the door. And so as we did that kind of initial discovery phase, we found out that one of the ways that they were driving customers was through Groupon. And so for people that aren't familiar, Groupon has sort of changed their model for how they do payout, and so it was really hurting them. And the other aspect that we discussed that they didn't really consider is that there's a particular type of person that uses Groupon, right? And it's usually, I like to say, I'll try anything once. And that's not necessarily for a business where you're looking for long-time commitment, the type of person that you're necessarily after. Somebody wants a steep discount and to try it once. And so what we have done then is, before we've even finished building their new website, we built a specific landing page and started experimenting with advertising through AdWords, Facebook, Yelp, all of those kind of avenues, and just really wired up those analytics, because again, like, it's the how do you know when it's working sort of thing. And now we can get into hypothesis testing, split testing on what's the video you show, what are the images that you use, how do you talk about the service. And so that's just another case of that initial phase actually being so much more important than you might think, and it's not something I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's the diagnostic. Really.
That's right.
You know, so going back to the cryotherapy folks, restore
cryotherapy.
Yeah.
That's right.
For those guys, and so you guys went through, did the analytics, and started doing some work, and basically retooled what they were doing. For them, as the customer, what type of feedback did you get from them after you went through that process?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the common thread that we usually get as far as feedback is how do we keep working together, right? Because they realize that there is so much kind of solutioning and strategy that's needed, and it's not something that usually is coming internally, especially when it has that heavy technology component. And so we're sort of now an extension of them insofar as we're monitoring those analytics, we're monitoring those campaigns, making suggestions, helping them refine it. We're even starting to engage in some other projects, right? Because they get really excited about some of the things we've done for their clients as we're continually engaging. And so they have another service they offer, which is like drip therapy through like an IV. It takes a long time, very boring sort of thing. And so we're actually prototyping a virtual reality experience while people wait. And so there's just a lot of different ways that we found that we can work together, and it's usually one of those things where we engage thinking we're going to build a website, we end up doing a whole marketing campaign, getting into virtual reality. That's typically the way things go once people just see how valuable that strategy component is.
You know, I've had this discussion for a number of folks. I'm that company. I've engaged you guys. You've done the site. How do I know that I got a return on my investment? What tells me?
Exactly. So the thing that is really important to us is that feedback loop. So if you think about the 3 stages, we have that initial like assessment and prototype phase. The middle one's the one everybody thinks that they want, right, which is the build phase where we make the thing. And then the third phase is ongoing kind of support and monitoring. And so the way that you know that you get that return on investment is that we bake analytics immediately into everything that we do. So maybe you're not selling something directly on your website, right? You're trying to focus on email signups or something like that. So as much as we can kind of put the tentacles of analytics into your site and show that increased engagement, show that interaction, whatever it is that piece of software or that tool is trying to accomplish, we show that it's working. We show the direction it's going, and a lot of interesting things can come out of that. So the example that the textile recycling company is, you might find that your drivers are doing things that you didn't actually anticipate that they do. You find that they have pain points that you didn't know that they had. If it's your website, you might find that your users actually interact in a different way, or as everyone is familiar with, the landscape of technology is changing day to day, every single day. And so that means that if you build something today, tomorrow it might be interacted with differently. And so we really try to focus on how do we capture that behavior so that we can learn and capitalize on it. You get a surge of traffic to your website because some new platform has opened up or someone wrote an article or whatever. How do you leverage that, and how do we know when it works? That's really, really important step that I think gets missed. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people that quote-unquote like build things are really afraid of providing, because they're not that good, right? They're not actually sure that their thing is going to work, and we want to try to be as honest about that as possible. Is that, yeah, this is a hypothesis, and let's test it together.
You know, for what we're trying to do here, let's circle back real quick.
Absolutely.
If folks are going, wow, I need to find Matthew, how do they find you on social media?
Yeah, so SeeSaw Labs. So we are currently on Facebook and LinkedIn, and so we're continually kind of expanding that as we're getting more involved and doing more things that are playful that we can kind of surface. One of the things is that we deal a lot with startups, and so not everything that we do we can kind of surface, but some of the things like virtual reality that we're getting into, these kind of like very kind of hot technologies, that's stuff that it's very easy to share, that we're kind of that we're kind of getting into. So
let's dig into the virtual reality space. How are you
Absolutely.
seeing that fit in with your clients or potential clients?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that virtual reality, kind of as we've all noticed, is getting more and more accessible, like every month, right? So now all these phones are coming out that have the capability baked right in, and so we're kind of past the cardboard box in the face stage, and now we're getting into the Google Daydream, right? Which has got like a little remote, and it's still your phone, and now game systems like PlayStation, all that stuff. It's all coming together where it's becoming very, very kind of accessible. And so the first space that this is really becoming powerful is simply in marketing, right? Because you're able to deliver a more rich experience than anyone has ever had before. Getting people to interact with a product or enrich an experience, like I was saying for the restore crowd therapy example, right? You take something that is actually kind of boring. And you actually make it something you look forward to, where you're going to have this experience that you've not had before. Another kind of example of it is it has really interesting implications in like an architecture kind of space. So we have one person that we're partnering with now who they're looking to build a specific facility, okay? And so they're interacting with their investors, and they're selling the dream, right? They're selling the story. And the component to that we're building for them is we're actually building a virtual experience where instead of it just being pictures on a PowerPoint or something like that, they can come into this meeting with these daydreams, right? Put it on the head of the investor, and that person can now look around inside of this virtual building and see the potential and the scale and the magnitude of what actually is going to be accomplished. And that, I think, has really, really powerful impacts, because when you kind of go from that flat 2D version of something to actually feeling like you're in there and getting the sense of scale, it's magical. Absolutely magical.
Have you done any testing on that to see how the uptake rate is when you put it into a customer experience?
So the interesting thing is that it is such a paradigm shift that it is really hard to find kind of like the apples to apples to compare it to. But we have found that in the experience that we've done, like the feedback is phenomenal. It goes from this thing where it's not something anyone expects, really, right? Everyone knows what it is, but they don't really expect it yet. And so when you add that virtual reality component to whatever your campaign is, or your experience, or your meeting, or whatever that thing is, it's something that's just memorable, right? That people come away and, like, you're not going to forget that you put on the virtual reality device. It's very, very interesting in that regard.
We talked before the show, and we were talking about another example that you were using, and it was with Countable. Is that correct?
Not with virtual reality.
No.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
shifting
sure.
gears.
Okay.
What I was intrigued about is about the accountability capability that you guys were talking about doing at distance. So
yes.
Let's dig into that case study a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Countable started as an idea, as many great things do, and it was a startup that we partnered with very early on, and their whole idea is that listeners may be familiar with microloans, and usually what the sort of thing is it's a loan to somewhere far away, another country like Rwanda or something like that, where sometimes it's for like medical equipment or like coffee or something like that, right? Like Starbucks has told me that they're going to buy X number of pounds of coffee for me roasted. I need to now go buy the coffee and the roasting equipment to supply that, and I need a loan to do it. And traditionally, there's a lot of risk in that, right? It's a very distance relationship. There's not a lot of accountability. It's not easy to just phone someone up in that regard. So what Countable does is we've partnered with them to build this platform that has several different kind of components to it. But what it does is it tries to mitigate that risk by creating that accountability. So for the lendee, what they're doing is providing documentation, taking photographs. There's a sort of a schedule of how everything's going to happen. I'm going to pick up the equipment on Tuesday. It's going to be delivered to this location at this time. They're taking photographs. They're scanning documents. So there's that component where they're capturing everything. And then for the lendor, then they're able to see kind of the schedule. So as they're dispensing the necessary funds for all of these steps, there's sort of a checks and balances type thing that's happening. And then there's the wrapper around it. We're accountable as kind of managing all of this and making these opportunities available to these people that want to do the investing. And so that started out as something very, very small. They just finished their Series B funding, and now we've taken that partnership, and now we're sort of helping them transition to handling a lot of it internally. And so it's kind of like the baby bird leaving the nest sort of thing. But that's where I really say that we're after partnerships, not projects. Anybody could just build them the thing, right? And try to just here's your app, have fun with it. Let us know if you need some more stuff. But we're really interested in how do you get the most value out of that creation. And there are actually a couple of ways that people end up working with us, and one of them that is very, very successful is that we look at it as sort of like a subscription or ongoing agreement. And what that allows us to do is we can kind of match or like scale up or down depending on what the need is, the number of resources that we apply to something. So an important aspect of that is there's these sort of building blocks that we use to apply to a project, where we have a solutions engineer and a solutions strategist. And those are more kind of broad than just saying like we have a developer and we have a project manager, because we're looking again to really partner and drive value. So our engineers aren't just people turning a handle, right? They really understand this kind of like holistic view of how one solves problems, and they have their hands into the latest and greatest technology to make that happen. And then the strategist is more understanding those business needs and doing that initial kind of assessment, and then ongoing like evaluation of value and all of that. And so by doing that, it lets us stop focusing on things like what's the statement of work, what is going to fall under this thing, and instead it's this kind of flowing thing, because startup, what my priority is on Tuesday may not be the same priority on Thursday. That's okay. Like, we're cool with that, right? Because we want to continuously be driving the most value you can. You just have a new investor who wants to come in, but they're really interested in this aspect. Great, we'll totally shift gears and focus on that. We don't have to worry so much about the paperwork, because we're just part of your team now to help you succeed.
For the listener that may be going, yeah, I need to engage these guys, how do they think about what the potential cost of engagement might be? How do you price it to a potential customer?
Yeah, that's great. So I sort of mentioned that there are these like 3 phases, and so there's this initial assessment and prototype phase, and so the goal of that is for it to be much smaller than a full build engagement, right? It's something that is going to do a lot of discovery, and the goal of coming out of that is for the client or the partner to have something tangible that's valuable to them. So sometimes if it is like a marketing site or it's an app or something like that, we'll build it out, right, as a prototype. So we'll build out what it's going to look like. We may even, if there's some sort of complication or complicated calculus that's going on, there may be a visual component, and then we may put together also something that is kind of like a naked version of it, where you can go through and run the calculations and kind of prove that it works, right? Oftentimes, until you like get down into some of the algorithms that people have for things, you don't realize that there are problems until you get down to just doing the math. And so the goal is to do a lot of discovery, figure out kind of what is it that you actually need, what are you trying to solve, and then deliver something at the end of that phase that they could take, put it on a shelf, come back in 3 months and say, now I'm ready to execute this.
And within that range, you go, given what we talked about, the pricing you can look at is X.
That's right. So we kind of set some goals for what we're going to do, and about how much time that we think we're going to invest in that and partnering together, and kind of what the deliverable might look like. And it looks different for all sorts of things, but we really custom tailor it to the client, their budget, their needs, that sort of thing. And we often find that initial stage is so valuable, because what it does is it allows, when we move to the actual execution phase, that build phase, we have an amazing detailed idea of what we're about to build, and that sort of then estimate for that build phase, if that's how we end up engaging, is very accurate then.
Shifting gears a little bit.
Absolutely.
You have people on your team all over the place.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about how the tools that you guys use and the structure for the folk that are going, I want to build a company where my employees are best and brightest from everywhere on the planet.
That's exactly right.
How do you orchestrate, manage, and communicate with all of these folks?
Yeah, so it's 2017 is a heck of a time to be alive. Lots of people are familiar with Slack, and that's sort of like our day-to-day communication. We also use tools like Trello, which is sort of like this very flexible board style thing for keeping track of stuff. So we'll break projects down into that. And then we also have this like phase in the morning where we have a chunk of time where we do stand-ups, where everybody just gets together on these chats where we can share screen, we can share video, look at each other face to face, and we just get down and dirty and like what's happening today, what happened
What's your
yesterday.
favorite tool for doing that?
So a lot of times we actually use Google Hangouts,
Okay.
and because it's we use Google Calendar to sort of sync everybody across all the time zones, very nice. And as many people are probably familiar, Google Calendar has Google Hangouts kind of baked right into it, and so that tends to be very good for off the cuff screen sharing and video chat and all of that. And then when we're interacting with clients, we often use something called Uber Conference, which the initial meeting might be face to face or might even be over video chat. But Uber Conference is quite nice for sharing screen, and people can dial in, and so it accommodates all sorts of styles of how people like to interact. But then the thing that I think is so powerful about having a distributed team is it forces you, if you're going to be successful, to be incredibly organized. And one of the things that I always jokingly say is if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, right? And so it's so easy to, when you're kind of in a traditional office environment, for let's all get into the boardroom, have a meeting, great, let's go do it. 3 hours later, nobody remembers actually what the things were that we were going to do, and so that documentation component is incredibly important. And having a distributed team can really kind of force that, and it ends up being where I feel like I'm more connected and have more of an idea of what everyone's doing, what the current status is on everything, being a distributed team than I ever did being an in-person team, because you can quite frankly get lazy in person. And the other component to it is, like as you sort of alluded to, is that best and brightest, right? So basically every amazing person I've ever worked with, I've totally stolen from whatever their old gig was to come join our team at SeeSaw.
And the members of the team, are they structured as contractors? Are they structured as employees of SeeSaw?
So we do a little bit of both. So we actually, the majority of people are employees of SeeSaw, and then we have some people that we engage at a contract level for various reasons. Some of it is, so I actually have a good friend who is in he's in the film industry and does videos and all sorts, and he lives in the UK. And he's an absolute whiz when it comes to a very specific type of development for around WordPress. He's the guru, and so we engage with him for several hours a month or whatever to come in and kind of consult on those things. And so it does kind of give us the flexibility to capture those people who are otherwise engaged but brilliant and add a lot of value to the team. And we absolutely consider him part of the family as well. It's just a different way of working together.
For nuts and bolts, I think about billing and payroll, and you guys are all over the place.
Yeah.
So, on the billing side, is there something that you use or a piece of software that's used for billing?
So for billing, so there's a couple of components to it. So we all capture our time in like a time tracking tool called Harvest,
Okay.
which is fantastic at the project and individual level, and it sort of allows us to see kind of where we're tracking as far as a lot of time goes, or resources and all of that. And then we use Xero for some of the accounting, which is another kind of like similar tool in the space, and that allows for pretty easy invoicing and billing and all of that stuff as well. So it's all digital.
What was as you're going through your time tracking software, what was the biggest surprise that you think you recognized when you started to look at your time tracking data?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about time tracking data is that we sort of had this realization that we wanted to break it down and make it more granular. So there's this delicate balance between making it incredibly annoying and absolutely useless, and so you kind of gotta surf between. So actually, one of the most incredible things that we've done recently is we've broken up kind of the roles in a project. Because I'll be wearing a different hat every day, and so for me to just put time on a project isn't always incredibly accurate. Sometimes I'm doing a little bit of development, sometimes I'm working directly with the client, doing some like QA or whatever. And so we've broken that down, and it really kind of surprised us that kind of where we necessarily thought we were spending the time looked a little bit differently. And so that kind of helped us see maybe where some of our pain points were that we didn't realize, right? Where people were spending a lot of time in DevOps or something like that. We could find a way to mitigate that. There are a lot of tools out there. Heroku is a great place to host like an application or something like that, and it takes a lot of the DevOps headache away. And when you take one of our solution engineers and you look at their time, and you realize they're spending a lot of time on DevOps, it's really easy to do the math and see that, like,
for those that don't know,
DevOps, development operations. So if you imagine you built a thing, the thing that it sits on to make it work, to make it spin, that sort of that platform, which can have to scale up and down, right? If you have tons of users interacting with it, there's very kind of complicated hosting that might be all over the country or the world or whatever to meet all those needs. And there are tools out there that sort of make that kind of automatic. Expensive. But when you actually start looking at the time, how people are spending their times facilitating those needs, it doesn't look so expensive anymore. And that's been something that's been really powerful for us and allowed us to really focus on, again, delivering value with the way that we're spending our time.
You know, with that insight, what was the behavioral change other than changing DevOps hosting?
Yeah, so the behavioral change is just really like we have this culture now of like, where are the places that we feel like we're doing the same thing over and over again, or spinning our wheels? How do we take the things that feel like handle turning and automate them? And so part of that is like investing time in building our own internal libraries. So when you come along and you have a project that you'd like to engage in, we're like sitting there with these Lego blocks that are just like ready to assemble, and we can focus on like that top layer, which is the part that like the hard part, right? The really interesting part of solving your problem. All of the infrastructure or whatever is kind of done already. And we've even done that with virtual reality. So we have had several internal virtual reality projects because it's incredibly fun, and why not? But it's actually allowed us to really deliver a lot of value to the client because we have all the unknowns kind of sorted out. We have kind of like a boilerplate project now that we've kind of built that has the capability to be built to something like the HTC Vive, which has like the controllers and it's kind of room scale, and you can walk around and pick stuff up and throw it and shoot guns and all sorts of things, right? To the more like cardboard view, or like the Google Daydream, which runs on a phone. And so because we have this kind of boilerplate project, if you were to come to me and say like, I'm thinking about doing this virtual reality experience, how can we engage on like this minimal level for me to kind of try it out? We already have the platform that has all of the hard cruddy parts like figured out, and we can just really focus on that top layer of delivering the experience and not have to spin our wheels, burning a lot of time, getting all the infrastructure things kind of set up.
When you engage clients and after you've worked with them for a while, what's the biggest misconception that your clients have about what you guys do?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is like sometimes when we first engage with someone, they're coming at it with this idea that these are the guys that are going to like build the thing, right? And after they build the thing, that's going to be it.
One and done.
One and done. Who could imagine that a piece of software designed to solve a very complex problem might be a little more involved? But what we really find often is people are quite surprised at how good we are kind of at engaging at that strategy problem-solving level. And so it may start out with they think, we got this, we know exactly what our problem is, we need you to build this thing. And by the time we kind of reach the end of that engagement, now they're saying, we were thinking about X, like how could you maybe like help us with that, or what would you suggest? And we end up oftentimes just going into this ongoing kind of support where we're again focusing on partnerships, not projects. We are kind of an extension of their team at a level of engagement that makes sense to them budget-wise, but just lets them like know that we're just there, right? That they can pick up the phone and say like, we're struggling with this, or we're going to open this new location and we want to know like, should we be doing an AdWords campaign? Should we be adding it to the website now, or anything like that? And so I think the misconception oftentimes is that it's going to be this very kind of discrete engagement, and people often find that even the ones that do initially approach it like a partnership, they don't realize like actually how valuable it is to connect at such an intimate level.
We're going to shift gears. massively now.
Oh, I think I know what's coming up.
You have a passion
Yeah.
for parkour.
That's right. That's right. So I've been training parkour for about 10 years now. This kind of extends all the way back to that initial, the initial part of the story, being in college and realizing that engineering wasn't exactly what I was after.
We talked about parkour, where it came from.
Yeah.
Before you go into what you do, let's go into the origins of parkour.
Yeah. So the long story short about that is there was a French-occupied island, right, volcanic island, and it was comprised of these original inhabitants, and then these French people who had sort of colonized it, right? So the mountain erupts one day, and there's a soldier there who'd been studying the indigenous people and realizing like how naturally they moved and how beautiful it was. And when this volcano erupted, all of the natives made it to the shore just fine. The French people that were there were all sort of like, you can imagine like zombies trying to run away from this like lava flow, and there was massive casualty because of it. And so it inspired him to create this thing called Parcours de Combattant, which means the path of the warrior, and it eventually became part of the French Special Forces training. And it was all about this kind of efficient movement. So you fast forward a little bit, there was a kid in an orphanage on a military base who learned this. He'd go out in the woods in the middle of the night and train. He grew up, became a very famous firefighter in Paris. He had a son, David Bell is his name, and him and his friends shortened it and they called it parkour. And they made it into a game that they would play. And it sort of caught on. There's this newfangled thing called YouTube, and YouTube kind of was the explosion and birth of that, and how I initially found out about it as well.
How do you see parkour relating to what you do in business?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of like there's sort of two components to it. So one is that it is very much like a martial art insofar as it requires a tremendous amount of discipline and sort of the ability to abstract oneself from the situation, right? Which is enormously important in business entrepreneurship, is being able to suppress kind of those emotions and be able to look at something very plainly and have the discipline to execute. Where that kind of extends even further is parkour has this very problem-solving kind of component to it, which I said earlier on, is that problem-solving is just this thing that I can't get enough of. And parkour was very much that. So you look at this landscape that might have some rails and some walls and everything, and you're connecting the dots, right? You're creating this path to whatever your destination is, and that is like a kind of a huge parallel in the other stuff I do. And then there's this other component, which is, so I taught parkour for many years, and the first thing we teach is how to fall. Because you're going to fall, law of large numbers. You're going to jump to a rail, you're not going to hit it every single time. And so by knowing how to fall, you sort of have this like ingrained kind of backup plan, right, of how you're going to adapt to the unknown. So you have a plan, and when it doesn't go according to plan, you quickly adapt to the situation. And that obviously, as you might be able to imagine, has tremendous parallel in what I do now.
I think about there's a couple of videos from your LinkedIn
That's right.
site, and one you're stairs and rails and walls, and the other one you're in a supermarket.
That's right.
Jumping over stuff.
Side flipping over shopping carts and all sorts, yeah.
Yes, and loading up on
Pizza. I think it was pizza rolls.
Yeah, pizza rolls. I'm going like, there's a habit that's going astray.
Don't judge me on that one. I wouldn't eat the pizza rolls, but yeah, no. So that actually video was one that was really important to us from a. So there's always like kind of a play aspect, but there's actually a philosophical aspect of that as well, which is when we first started training. There's this mental toughness that's required to do a complex move, and the level of mastery that you have over that move is something that is in constant flux that you're trying to lock down. And the joke that we used to call is when you have your move, your complex move at its most controlled state, we call it grocery store. Because after we get done training, we'd often go to the grocery store to get food because we're hungry or whatever. And the grocery store is the worst place to have to do a trick like that if you imagine doing a flip or something, because it's a hard surface, sometimes slippery, it's often cold, and you're wearing street clothes. And so after training, if you could go to the grocery store and throw that move, you had it on lockdown. That was the thing. And so we had this idea a long time ago that we wanted to create a grocery store video. So we went to the supermarket, one of the 24-hour ones, at like 2 o'clock in the morning, hid a camera under a coat in the shopping cart, and then walked around and shot this video.
I can imagine the person stocking the shelves late at night going, they didn't just jump over the cooler.
Yeah,
Really
there's like the person buffing the floor, and they're like, I don't get paid enough to worry about this.
Yeah. You know, looking into the future for SeeSaw,
Yeah.
and what have you got on the horizon that you're excited about, that you're going to be tackling here soon?
Yeah, so we're really, really excited to continue to kind of build these partnerships and start to offer solutions in these emerging technologies. So we've gotten our hands dirty with chatbots, some artificial intelligence, virtual reality, which we mentioned. The very exciting space is that all of this stuff is starting to sort of hit that consumer level now, and we're starting to see an increased demand, especially when we partner with like marketing agencies, right, who have the ideas but don't necessarily have the technical chops to execute. And as we're continuing to forge more of those partnerships, we're very excited to continue to kind of expand and deliver in that space.
You've been an entrepreneur since the engineering department, I guess, did measure up.
Yeah.
What influences early on do you think contributed to your entrepreneurial bent?
Yeah, so my father was a small business owner, and so just really instilled that into me. And so my summers, my after school was spent at the business, and sort of with all of these resources. It was a printing business, actually, and so I had access to computers, to graphic arts equipment, to paper, cardboard, string, everything, right? And so sort of my thing was just, you have this time, you have all these resources, you have literally nothing to do, right? Because the internet isn't even like a huge thing, right, as I'm a kid. So it's me making like suits of armor out of like cardboard and stuff, and then just watching my dad like run this business and understand this aspect of problem solving and delivering value and all of this, and just being kind of steeped in that with all of these resources. So I'd end up like kind of like miming that and making stuff, like making up little businesses and things, right? Like making up like the little shops and selling things and playing with like my sister and stuff, and having access to the tools was just huge. I mean, coming out of middle school knowing how to use Photoshop was kind of powerful for just doing anything I wanted to do.
Business, you know, for a lot of us, we'll read books of one kind or another.
Yeah.
What's your recent favorite book that you've read?
How to Create a Mind. And so I've really started in the recent past gotten into reading things about how do people make decisions, right? Because being in the space of helping people deliver with these businesses and get customers in the door, it's getting people to do something that you want them to do. That is in essence what marketing is. It's what's running a successful business is being compelling enough that someone will do what you want them to do. And so as I understand the human mind better and how we make decisions and how we're influenced, that helps me remove my own sort of bias towards things, but also just better understand like the mind of the customer, be able to relate in a better way. And How to Create a Mind is a really interesting book. It sort of goes beyond that into the artificial intelligence realm, and it's looking at this pattern recognizing theory of the mind. And the idea is that at the most basic components, our brain is made of these pattern recognizing cells. And so the way that manifests itself is really interesting, and the implications that it has for how you look at the populace in aggregate, but also in the individual, and get them to do what you'd like.
Social engineering, for sure.
That's right.
Best piece of advice, business or otherwise, you think you ever got?
Best piece of advice: no one cares about your thing. Absolutely.
Really?
Yes. So that's the thing, is that you meet all these people all the time, and they sort of have this idea where they're very infatuated with their own idea, and I think the best piece of advice was I was telling someone like our thing's going to be so huge, the sort of just barely into the kind of the startup thing, and I think it maybe was like my dad. He's like, look, no one cares about your thing. And he was right. I cared about my thing a lot, and I could imagine that other people did, and that's sort of that bias that I was talking about a moment ago, that you really have to be able to detach yourself from your own business. And if that means killing an idea very early, that's really important, that sort of fail-fast mentality. But keeping this idea that, like, it is your job to make someone care. It is not their, like, obligation or natural state.
I think about, as you're talking about, no one cares about your thing, and you're working with these various businesses trying to identify the pain point of their potential customer. What process do you go through to identify that pain point?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So being kind of that outsider in the initial stage is actually incredibly valuable, because you can look at someone and they can having them explain how they think, like, a customer comes to their business, or how they think someone uses whatever their thing is, and then that kind of morphing into what their pain point is, what their daily frustration is, and you start to, if you have a lot of experience in this, stuff starts to smell sometimes, right? When someone says, "Oh, people come to our website," and that's how they find, like, this thing. And so what's really powerful is that with some of these analytics, especially in kind of this digital interaction that happens in a lot of stuff, you can actually set up the analytics, set up the telemetry that really drives down into proving if that's true. And a lot of times an initial engagement will start with a paradigm shift of the way you think people are doing stuff and the way that they're doing it. And we find ways to prove that, and that can be huge. Incredibly valuable to know what you don't know.
Mark Twain did something about that. Isn't that true? It said, "It's not what you know that'll hurt you, it's what you know that's not necessarily true that'll get you something along those lines."
That's
Well, you know, it's been interesting, and as we were chatting before, you have a new trainee in the parkour world that you're training at home.
That's right. I have a 2-year-old daughter who at every opportunity I'm throwing up in the air and turning upside down, and we have a pull-up bar in the kitchen, and she's seeing me do pull-ups, and she's like, "Oh, Evie, try." So I hold her up there and give her the little assist, and she's just a little monkey, and we're gonna keep that going as much as we can.
Junior parkour.
That's right.
Perfect.
That's right.
Now, in up and down the Front Range, is there an active parkour community?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So there's a group of guys here called Boundless Parkour, and they meet together in a gymnastics gym during the winter when it's much more difficult to train outside, and they train outside all around kind of Colorado Springs here, and it's great because these guys I've been able to connect with recently, and they're a bit younger than I am, just kind of out of high school and stuff, and having this common denominator of this love for movement and pushing one's mind is just amazing, because you kind of connect through all these different parts of life. And then as you go up kind of even north of here, it's obviously quite large in Denver as well. There's a group up there, Apex, that has some gyms, and just absolutely phenomenal training. Even if you want to go even further west, Boulder as well. Colorado is actually like a very strong part of the parkour community.
Well, Matthew, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and sharing what you guys do and your approach to business. So thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely, this was a pleasure.
You bet.